2018 is going to be a massive year for South African banks, and I suppose it's like saying the ANC's elective conference might or might not go ahead. Tell us something we don't know. Well, Investec CEO Stephen Kossef is certainly taking the new competitive landscape in banking quite seriously. Chatting to him the other day, he isn't underestimating the threat posed by the entry of Discovery and the likes of Time Digital. As he mentioned, 3 new players have received banking licenses and are preparing to launch, and there are rumours of others joining in too. Now, someone who knows this better than most is Julia Ahfeldt, a certified customer experience professional, or a CCXP. And Julia, you consult to blue chips, multinationals and all sorts, advising them on how to really stay relevant in a market that is transitioning away from being inwardly focused silos to being dynamic and customer centric. Welcome.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to speak with you.
I've also got Nick Ray, BrandZeye's head of marketing, on the line. BrandZeye do some pretty amazing stuff with predictive sentiment analytics. Welcome, Nick. Always a pleasure.
Thanks, Mike.
Now, Julia, kick us off, because I think banking, it's not one of those things that ordinary people, you and I, get, well, maybe you, get out of bed and say, wow, I'm going to go and transact on a bank. It's the one arena, though, that is at the forefront of trying to understand the power of data and the whole customer experience. And if you look at the word customer centricity, it's one of those, it's been a buzzword for some time that's almost repeated so often, it's all but lost its meaning. But if you look at the likes of Amazon founder Jeff Bezos reckons it's behind his phenomenal success. How do you view customer centricity?
Well, customer centricity, I think, is something that's risen to the forefront of business strategy in recent years. I think, with the advent of social media, and now, every consumer has a megaphone in their pocket, it's really given a lot of power to customers. So over the last, I'd say probably 5 to 7 years, we've seen this transition of power from businesses to the consumer. And so with that, businesses have had to really deliver on their promises. They've had to live up to expectations. And when they don't, they're really held to account by consumers. And oftentimes that's through social media. And businesses are trying to understand, how is it that they can wrap their minds around what consumers want? And how do they understand experiences and then figure out how to deliver on those experiences? Mm-hmm. And what's quite cool, so social media data then becomes this double-edged sword where, it's a place where consumers can voice their opinions about organizations and brands, but it's also this amazingly rich source of data and insight on the customer experience.
It absolutely is. It's almost like a really rich seam of gold that has been hitherto untapped. Now businesses are starting to tap into it, and more we're seeing that the returns are definitely worth those initial forays or explorations. Now, Nick, you collaborated with Julia in the release of the 2017 Banking Sentiment Index recently, but before we get into that, how did BrandZeye predict Trump and Brexit?
Well, that we could spend a whole interview talking about that, Michael. But basically, through using our technology and our unique methodology of using human intelligence and artificial intelligence to try and understand social conversation at scale. And for a bunch of things like elections and politicians and banks, there's an enormous amount of people talking about them online. And the historic challenge is, how do you make sense of hundreds of thousands or millions of conversations? In the US election, for example, we tracked over 4 million conversations leading up to the election. And for kind of one person to kind of click through and read all those tweets and Facebook comments is impossible. So we use a combination of artificial intelligence to try structure that data in a way that makes it intelligible and allows you to analyze it. But then we take a sample of all that conversation and put it through a crowd of actual humans. And these are people who are local language experts who can look at each tweet or Facebook comment or blog post and interpret it for meaning and understand that the author is being sarcastic or using a local idiom or using some local slang. The problem with only using machines to do that is they get it wrong a lot of the time. Because I can say, thanks a lot, Nedbank. I loved my 3 hours in your Santon branch. And I'm clearly being sarcastic, but I've used words like thanks a lot and I loved, and to a machine that looks like I'm being positive.
And those are the limitations of using AI, and why crowdsourcing sentiment analysis has clearly been so successful for you. People can pick up on the nuance of communication. Now, just take us through the methodology that you've used for this annual study into sentiment and the way people feel around their banks.
Sure. So there's actually two sets of research that the study comprises. One is a bunch of brand's eye data, which I'll talk to now, and then Julia also conducted a Net Promoter Score survey, which she can talk to from a methodological point of view. Brand's eye, we looked at 1.8 million mentions between September 2016 and August 2017. That was those 1.8 million mentions, and I mentioned a tweet, a Facebook comment, something like that, were made by about 550,000 authors. We took a statistically significant sample of that conversation and put it through our crowd, and we asked them to do two things. Uncover the sentiment of the author, and also try and understand what was the topic that was driving that sentiment. So they might be positive towards Capitec, and the topic was about pricing. And that's really what our crowd has done. And if we do take our sample in the right way, we are able to extrapolate with high levels of statistical confidence on the total population of conversation.
And you mentioned Capitec. They did come out on top of this survey. But
for the second year in a row.
For the second year in a row. And I think their digital model is one that's really got the big banks to sit up and take notice. And I say the big banks, they are one of the big banks. They're now the second biggest retail bank in the country. So quite clearly what they're doing is working. And I think, Julia, when you look at this from your area of expertise, and that's understanding how strategically businesses are looking at the customer experience, I think, sometimes when you use the word silo, I tend to think that the actual word was invented inside a bank. You're bounced from one department to the next. I can go and ask my bank about my mortgage and say, well, can I talk to you about my credit card or my checkout? No, sorry, sir, we need to now transfer you to another division. Why can't banks have one dashboard view of me?
Yeah, and we've all had that experience too, and it's not a fun one. I think one of the things that Capitec has done so well is they've focused on the basics. So, they've got a value proposition that isn't super flashy. They've focused on being able to deliver on their promise and just, living up to customer expectations, making sure that when there are issues, they are resolved quickly. I don't know, everything behind the scenes in terms of their secret sauce, their recipe for success, but I would, if I were a betting woman, I would definitely bet that they have busted down some of those walls in between the traditional silos.
It's one thing that they're doing right, Nick.
Yeah, I would say so, Michael, and I think they benefit from having less legacy systems and so on than the other banks, and that allows them to be more innovative and I think what they've done very cleverly is use technology to provide a better basic banking experience rather than trying to use technology to drive kind of say high net worth or kind of shiny innovation. They've applied technology to mean that you can walk into a branch and instead of signing, you can use your fingerprint. And that makes things a lot easier. And I think with the new entrants coming into the market, they're not going to have all this legacy plumbing that an Absa and a Standard Bank has. And they don't have all these old siloed systems. They're going to build brand new systems on a clean slate using new technology. And I think that's going to be massively disruptive.
But when we look at that, Julia, you agreed there. What does that mean for the incumbents? What does this year's study reveal to you about what the incumbents need to improve upon?
Well, I think, one of the challenges that the incumbents have is that they have this legacy of, all the experiences that have led up until now. So loyalty isn't something that you establish overnight. Customer loyalty is something that is built over time, the accumulation of multiple experiences. And so where these banks are now is a testament to what's happened before, and you can't change that overnight. So I think what they need to do is focus on how do they improve the experience? How do they become more agile around what customers say that they want, but that actually changing that? I mean, these are big organizations. It's like the Titanic. So getting them to switch directions, it's difficult, but they need to do it, and they need to do it as quickly as they possibly can, because the new entrants into the bank, to Nick's point, they don't have the legacy plumbing. They also don't have the emotional baggage of previous negative experiences, and that's kind of an uphill battle that these established brands, particularly ABSA. I mean, in our research, they didn't turn out very well. There's something that they really need to focus on.
I hate to say it, but I mean, one just has to log on to the ABSA website and see how many clicks it takes you to get into their banking platform. They have a lot of work to do, and I think many of the other incumbents do as well. So without singling any one bank out here, let's look at the Net Promoter Score, which is very interesting. Just explain what the Net Promoter Score is in layman's speak for listeners, Julia.
Sure. So the Net Promoter Score it's a kind of a loyalty metric. So what you do is you ask people how likely they are to recommend a particular brand to friends and family. And it's one of the most widely used metrics in the field of customer experience. So, which is great. I mean, it's something that a lot of executive teams have, grabbed onto, and they use it as a strategic measure for customer experience. But it also has some limitations too. So, what we tried to do with this study is look at not just Net Promoter Score, but see if we could use it as a way to actually measure the value of experiences. So, what we did was compare the Net Promoter Scores that were provided by customers against those that were provided by non-customers. And the idea being that the impression, the sort of, how a non-customer would build their impression or opinion of a particular brand would be based on what they hear from friends and family and the news, things like that. And that for a customer it would be the same plus whatever their experience is. So if we subtract one from the other, we actually get that the delta between those two things is actually the value of the experience. So we were looking both at the Net Promoter Score, because we know that that's something that's fairly well understood among business decision makers, but also looking for a way that we could measure experience, which was quite cool. And unsurprisingly, Capitec knocked it out of the park with this one. So we know that they're doing well. We know they're growing into their customer base, and we can look to them and say, right, they're probably winning on experience. They're delivering these great experiences,
well, that's the holy grail, isn't it? I mean, Nick, when we talk about, even across sectors, you look at retail, whenever I have a conversation with a CEO, Ian Moyer at Woolies, or when Kevin Hedderwick was head of Famous Brands, he always used to say it's putting the customer first, but also understanding that the consumers today control brand reputations. And in industries where technology is breaking down the barriers to compete, the consumer doesn't have a tied loyalty to a brand anymore. The ability to switch and move is far easier than it's ever been. So it's that's what's making this landscape so much more competitive, isn't it?
And look, I actually think it's good for us. I think, to Julia's earlier point, it's holding businesses to account. They can't go out and make a whole bunch of promises and then not deliver on them. And the nice thing about social media is that it's not just a forum for an individual to express a complaint or a concern and have their issue addressed and being cared about, but it also, there's all of their friends and family on their Facebook feed also see it. So there's a massive knock-on effect of their experience that bleeds out into the market and into people's perceptions of the bank or of the brand. And so it's becoming a massive lever to drive change in corporate culture, and I think, and in political culture, frankly. Look at Trump. And so I think it's in general a force for good in the world.
It is a messy space, as is democracy, though. If you look at it, Julia, someone might go onto social media and tweet something negative about a financial institution when perhaps all they were trying to do was follow through on a recalcitrant payer, for example, someone who hadn't paid their credit card in 3 months. How do you as a brand, it's impossible to control, I guess, but how do you ensure that kind of unwarranted and unsubstantiated attack on social media doesn't negatively impact on your brand?
Well, I mean, I think that there's damage control on the sort of PR side of things when things do flare up, but that's reactive. What organizations should be doing is focusing on how do they, make sure that they deliver great experiences so that there aren't so many people out there on social media saying negative things. I mean, if somebody is, yes, it's become much easier to voice your opinion because of social media, but if one person is saying something, many other people are having that experience. They're just not saying anything. So we need to take all of these pieces of feedback as these little nuggets of gold, and in insight into how we can improve the experience. And one of the great things about the brand's eye data is that they're able to categorize and develop these topics so that you can filter through and understand that. So I think that in the customer experience professional field, there's been acknowledgement for a long time that inbound, unaided customer feedback is amazing. It's an amazing, rich source of information, but it's messy. And that's been the challenge, is that it's been inaccessible. We can't make sense of it. It's too difficult or too expensive to do that. And what's really exciting about this research is that we were able to bring together this methodology for analyzing the data and look at it through a lens of customer experience.
Absolutely. Take the unstructured and turn it into a bit of a structured seam that can start delivering some of those nuggets. Julia, Nick, we're going to have to leave it there. I think we could have spoken for the next hour on some of the insights that you've produced, but we really have run out of time. But fascinating to see how banks are going to respond to this hyper-competitive environment. It's a great time to be a consumer. Thanks for your time.